truco para Bola. Arranca por la derecha el genio del mundo mundial.
Someone do this glory!
Sergio,
Lift up for France!
extraordinaria.
Will Iran be able to play at the 2026 World Cup? Over the last few months, that is the question that has been debated among officials in the FFIRI, Iran's football and government body, as well as within AFC and FIFA. At the time of writing this, it looks likely that Iran will feature, but given that the situation is so unpredictable, the answer is still very much up in the air. But what led to this point? The reasons behind this controversy find their origins not in the world of football, but rather in current geopolitics. Regardless of whether the Iranian national team participates in the 2026 World Cup or not, this incident is only the most recent chapter in a long story of how international football is intertwined with global politics, both in Iran and in the rest of the world. The Iranian national football team, known to its fans as Team Melli, is one of the strongest in Asia. Historically featuring a talented squad made up of several European-based players alongside many more who play in their own domestic league, one of the more prominent leagues in the AFC, Iran have solidified their status as a regional powerhouse. Having won 3 Asian Cups, Iran have also qualified for 7 World Cups, including the last 4. Having secured qualification for the 2026 World Cup over a year ago, Iran were drawn into Group G alongside Belgium, Egypt, and New Zealand. However, their participation at the upcoming World Cup finals in the USA, Mexico, and Canada potentially looks in doubt. And the reason why has to do with the ongoing conflict in the Middle East. Within this region, there is a classic multipolar struggle for dominance between some of the most powerful nations that lie here. Over the past century, Iran has experienced major changes to their society, which has shaped the state of the country today. Overseeing the land and the people of the historical Persian Empire, Iran was a monarchy under Mohammad Reza Shah Pahlavi until the Islamic Revolution of 1979. Following mass discontent among the population who saw the Shah as incompetent, corrupt, too friendly to the West, and not loyal to his faith, he was overthrown and the Iranian government, as well as their entire country, was completely restructured. Among the power vacuum, Ayatollah Ruhollah Khomeini and his traditionalist Shia fundamentalist movement emerged as the most powerful faction, reforming Iran into a Shia theocratic republic, the state in which Iran remains today. Iranian society has many characteristics which then saw the nation become a formidable economic, cultural, and military power in the region, such as their massive population, wealth of natural resources, large military, their skilled production and technology industries, and religious importance as a center of Shia Islam. As a result of the cultural, religious, and ethnic differences, Iran quickly became a rival to other regional powers, such as Israel and Saudi Arabia, among others. The Iranians have their own hegemonic ambitions, of course, but this also makes them an obstacle in the way of other nations and their interests in the Middle East, most specifically the Israelis and the Saudis. The tension, specifically between Israel and Iran, had been simmering for decades, but it reached a point of no return after the October 7th attacks in 2023, which then embroiled the Middle East in a region-wide conflict. After 2 years of fighting Iran's proxies in Hamas, Hezbollah, and the Houthis, the two nations engaged in direct warfare last year in June 2025 in what has now been called the 12-Day War. This short conflict was ultimately inconclusive for all parties involved and came to a close after a ceasefire was agreed upon. However, the hostilities were reopened this year when Israel and the United States conducted a joint surprise attack against Iran in an attempt to destroy their nuclear program as well as defeat and overthrow the Iranian regime once and for all, a conflict which is still ongoing as of writing this. Starting on February 28, the US and Israel launched a series of colossal airstrikes meant to destroy Iran's missile and drone capabilities, disable their nuclear program, and assassinate high-profile figures. The initial results were devastating, with the supreme leader of Iran, Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, being assassinated in one of the strikes. However, the Iranian regime has since weathered the storm and remained intact. They then retaliated by launching thousands of missile and drone strikes against Israel and American bases in the region, as well as closing the Strait of Hormuz. This conflict has also spilled over, with Iran targeting several Gulf states such as Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates, and others who they see as supporting their enemies. Meanwhile, Iranian proxies in Hezbollah, the Houthis, as well as the Popular Mobilization Forces and Islamic Resistance in Iraq have joined the fight, seeing combat spread to Lebanon, Iraq, and Yemen. Following the increasing death toll as well as the grossly negative effect on the global economy, several attempts were made at peace. But unfortunately, each ceasefire has quickly fallen apart, leaving the conflict open at the moment. This skirmish has had major implications for both Iranian society and numerous other nations across the region, but one specific area that was heavily affected is the world of football. For example, the 2026 Finalissima between Argentina and Spain, which was scheduled to be played in Doha, was cancelled after Qatar was hit by Iranian missile strikes. And after huge disagreements between Argentina and Spain over where to play the game instead, the competition was just abandoned altogether. Also, due to the airspace being closed, as well as an issue with visas, it looked doubtful whether the Iraqi national team would be able to play their World Cup qualifying playoff in Mexico. However, this was resolved, Iraq was able to play, and they actually won their playoff match, punching their ticket to the 2026 World Cup. But obviously, the situation within Iran is the most disrupted. Iran's own domestic league, the Persian Gulf Pro League, has since been suspended after the start of the conflict. The current plan is for the league to resume in July, though this is contingent on how the war continues to develop. If not, the season could be cancelled entirely. Even if the plan goes through, this still presents some major issues, as Iran will have to choose which of their club teams will participate in the AFC Champions League season by June. This also brings up issues for players who play in the Persian Gulf Pro League, who are going to the World Cup, given that they have not played any club matches for several months beforehand. This also doesn't just affect Iranian players. For instance, there are several players from Uzbekistan, Haiti, Bosnia, and the Ivory Coast that play for an Iranian club team who would most likely be going to the World Cup. But of course, the biggest question of the bunch is whether Iran will feature at the 2026 World Cup at all. What makes this situation even more unprecedented is the fact that all of Iran's games would be hosted in the US, one of the nations that they are in open warfare with. There have been many instances of nations in the middle of a conflict still being able to send a squad to a World Cup or another international tournament, but this is the first time that a World Cup host is at war with one of the participating nations. Looking at a timeline of statements from official figures and organizations across the world shows how Iran's inclusion at the World Cup has been in question, with often no conclusive answer in sight. Going as far back as last year, after Iran qualified for the World Cup, a travel ban was issued, restricting most Iranian citizens from entering the US, which would inevitably hurt their fan attendance at the World Cup matches. However, once the conflict began, US President Donald Trump was asked in early March about Iran potentially playing at the World Cup, to which he said that he ultimately does not care, which makes sense as he is more focused on the war effort. The first Iranian statement on the topic came about a week later, in the wake of the Iranian state TV confirming the death of Ayatollah Khamenei. Ahmad Doniamali, the Iranian sports minister, stated on Iranian national television that the team cannot and will not participate at a World Cup under a regime that killed their leader. He also stated that the focus of the government is on its own people and not on football at the moment. A very understandable statement. The following day, President Trump responded by saying that the Iranian team is welcome to join, but that he doesn't really believe it's appropriate for, quote, their life and safety. A few days after these statements, though, there seemed to be a glimmer of hope as the FFIRI submitted a formal request to FIFA, asking for their games to be moved from the US to Mexico instead. However, FIFA President Gianni Infantino rejected this proposal as it would be too hard to coordinate. The AFC General Secretary, Windsor John, did try to calm the situation by asserting that Iran will still be playing at the World Cup, urging everyone to recognize that this is a very volatile moment where many emotional statements will be made. The Iranian Ministry of Sport seemed to double down though, issuing a directive that barred all national squads from competing in tournaments hosted in hostile countries. However, the tone seemed to heavily change in April, once there were major attempts at a ceasefire by the United States. President Infantino met with the Iranian team at the beginning of the month and declared that, quote, Iran will be at the World Cup. Everything is fine, end quote. 2 weeks later, the head coach of the national team, Amir Galnohi, told Iranian News that, quote, there is currently no reason preventing us from participating. God willing, we will participate, end quote. Then, Sports Minister Donia Mali confirmed that the Supreme National Security Council is conducting a review in which the decision rests solely on whether the safety of the players and staff can be guaranteed while on American soil. And as of April 22nd, 2026, it was judged that the Iranian team is fully prepared to participate, meaning their tournament looks to be going on as usual. But with the unstable situation we have at hand, this is still very much subject to change. But what if Iran ultimately does not go to the World Cup? FIFA would have a major problem on their hands with the tournament coming up so soon. What they would most likely do is give Iran's spot to the United Arab Emirates, which would be ironic given that the UAE is one of the nations in combat with Iran at the moment. In choosing a replacement team, FIFA would have to look at the highest ranked team from Asia which did not qualify, in this case the UAE. Similarly, the UAE did make it as far as the AFC playoffs and World Cup qualifying for this cycle, but lost to Iraq. There are some other less likely scenarios though. Some reports claim that FIFA would just give the spot to the highest ranked team from any continent who didn't qualify, which would be Italy, who shockingly missed out on yet another World Cup. Another possibility that has been rumored is a contingency playoff, which would feature the two highest ranked European teams who didn't qualify and two of the highest ranked Asian teams that didn't qualify, facing off to see who goes through. Both of these scenarios seem highly unlikely due to the fact that there is a fixed number of teams from each confederation to qualify for any given World Cup, not to mention how difficult it would be to organize yet another playoff this close to the tournament's kickoff. As was said before, this situation is unique to the world of football, but there is some slight historical precedent. If Iran were to drop out and a replacement team were to be called up, it would cause many obvious issues, but it has happened before with some surprising results actually. 10 days before Euro 1992 kicked off, Yugoslavia was disqualified after a United Nations sanction was placed on the country due to the outbreak of the Yugoslav Wars. Denmark, the next highest team in Yugoslavia's qualifying group, was invited as a replacement. Despite missing some of their best players due to the short notice, Denmark went on to surprisingly win Euro 1992. Similarly, the 2001 Copa America in Colombia faced a lot of disruption due to an insurgency between the military and the Revolutionary Armed Forces of Colombia, otherwise known as FARC. The rebel group sent death threats to the Argentine national team, and fearing for the players' safety, the AFA decided to pull out of the tournament a day before it started. Luckily, Honduras was able to fill the spot on short notice, and despite missing most of their starting squad, they were able to make it as far as third place. If Iran does go, it would create a precarious situation where the World Cup host is currently engaged in combat with one of its participants. While this exact scenario has never played out at a World Cup, there have been several similar instances at other international tournaments. For example, Qatar qualified for the 2019 Asian Cup, which was hosted in the UAE in the middle of the Qatar diplomatic crisis. While the two nations were not at war, they had cut off all diplomatic ties, while the UAE and other Gulf nations essentially imposed an embargo on Qatar due to both parties accusing the other of sponsoring terrorism. Since Qatari citizens were not allowed to enter the Emirates, no traveling fans were there to support their team. Qatar ironically used this situation to their advantage as a rallying cry, and ended up winning the Asian Cup, even beating both the UAE and Saudi Arabia on their path to victory. One other situation was during the 1982 Africa Cup of Nations hosted in Libya. Following the 1977 border war between Egypt and Libya and continued high tensions, the Egyptian government decided to pull their team from the tournament due to security concerns. Looking specifically at Iran and the rest of the Middle East, geopolitics has had a huge impact on football in recent years. Just 4 years ago, at the 2022 World Cup, Iran's campaign was negatively affected by political strife back home. Right before the World Cup started, mass protests erupted centered around the issue of women's rights, with the supporters saying it was the will of the people, speaking out against political repression, while the detractors said the discontent was largely fomented by Iran's foreign adversaries trying to undermine the government internally by any means. Regardless, the team was split between those who supported the protest and those who did not, with many refusing to sing the national anthem during their opening match against England. The situation happening at home visibly affected the team's morale, and they fell to a harrowing 6-2 loss. War in the Middle East, or at least political controversy, doesn't always spell defeat on the football pitch though. For example, despite going through one of the most violent periods of the Iraq War back at home, the Iraqi national team was actually able to unite around the flag and win the 2007 Asian Cup, to the shock of many. Looking back at Iran, their national team as a whole is part of the state apparatus and is by design an extension of the state. This is not unique to Iran. In fact, every single national football team on earth is used by their country's government to legitimize the regime while acting as a form of soft power to uphold public policy and image. Specifically in Iran though, the strong connection between the Islamic Republic of Iran's ideology and the national team creates this dynamic where those who don't support the Ayatollah also don't support Team Melli. This is especially evident among the Iranian diaspora and will likely be seen at the World Cup should Iran feature. This circumstance is very similar to what happened in Syria during the Syrian Civil War, where the national team was seen as a representation of Bashar al-Assad and Baathism as an ideology. For those in Syria who opposed Assad or Baathism, they often actively rooted against their own team. Looking closely at how this conflict affects relations between the US and Iran, the two nations actually share a detailed history at the World Cup, but one that tells a story of peaceful competition. The first time the two nations faced off was an iconic group stage match at the 1998 World Cup in France. Despite the political tension, both teams decided to put aside politics and view each other solely as opponents on the pitch. In a respectful gesture, both sets of players posed for a group photo, and the Iranians even gifted the American players white roses. This match ended up as a 2-1 narrow win for Iran, which actually eliminated the United States from the World Cup. The next time the two nations faced each other at the World Cup finals was during the group stage at the most recent edition in Qatar, and yet again it was a feeling of mutual respect between the two teams, despite the heightened political backdrop of the time, as well as how crucial the match was, with both teams needing a win to advance to the knockout rounds at the expense of the other. In another tightly contested game, the US got revenge for the 1998 match, winning 1-0 and eliminating Iran from the 2022 World Cup. The question of whether or not Iran will be able to play at the 2026 World Cup is still very likely up in the air. With the way this situation is developing, it won't be until their opening game against New Zealand on June 15 in Inglewood kicks off that we will see a definite answer. But regardless if Team Melli features or not, this whole ordeal is yet another example of how wide-reaching the world of football is, to the point that it is directly affected by geopolitics.